Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Welcome to this episode of the Means of Grace podcast. I'm Kim Ingram, the Director of Ministerial Services in the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church, and I'm joined by Jesse Enniss.
Hi, I'm Jesse Enniss, and I am the Director of Communications for the Leadership Development Team of the Western North Carolina Conference.
We're in the moving season in the United Methodist Church as leaders are saying goodbye in one place and preparing to say hello in the next. Churches are grieving the loss of a beloved pastor and anticipating the gifts and energy the next pastor will bring. In this episode of Means of Grace, we are going to hear clergy tell some of their stories of making these transitions. We're talking with Duncan Martin, the pastor of Fairview United Methodist Church in the Yadkin Valley District of the Western North Carolina Conference. Duncan serves as a clergy member now and also grew up as a PK, or a preacher's kid. So he has lots of experiences with moves in and out of parsonages, coming and going from churches. Duncan, we welcome you, and we're glad you're here.
So I thought I'd begin by just giving some background of my life living in parsonages. Being a pastor's child, I've lived 29 of my 36 years in parsonages. And my only experience living in churches or serving churches has been in parsonages. We've never had a housing allowance or anything like that. And so that's where I've lived in 7 different parsonages in 29 years. I've never lived anywhere more than 5 years at a time, like even in college or anywhere else. And I know that's not like a normative experience. Meredith, my wife, who's a deacon, she's growing up, but until she was 18, she lived in 2 houses and in the same community. And before we were married, she lived in the 3 metropolitan areas of North Carolina, in Charlotte and the Triad, in the Triangle. So our first appointment since when I began ministry was in King, which is not in the Triad, the Triangle, or the Charlotte metro area. Yeah. And but lived in 7 different communities. And I'll say, like, in all those places, it's really neat, whether it's an annual conference or wherever we are or through social media. I'm always running into folks who have been a part of my life in the past, just living in this part of the state. And that's just such a blessing to have friendships and people who care about you and who are rooting for you and who are still supporting you, even though you lived there maybe over 30 years ago. That's a special thing for my life, and I'm so thankful for that. Living in parsonages has been interesting. As a child, I never knew any different. So people ask where I'm from, and I always just say I'm from nowhere because I'm a Methodist pastor's child. But thinking about this, I think I'm from a parsonage. That's my home. Is a parsonage. It's like a home that's not mine. And a funny story: when I was beginning my ministry, Meredith and I had been married for 6 weeks. And we moved into our first parsonage in King, and we had family and friends who were there helping us move in. The previous pastor was late getting out because of a moving van issue, which seems to kind of always happen. And so it was just one of those hectic days. It started to rain, and I think we clipped the gutter of the house with our moving van as we were walking, as we were driving in. It started out as a great day, but it was a wonderful time. Church members came by to say hey to us, and it was a great day. And but we were cleaning and working in the house and getting stuff ready. And someone in the house, somebody opened the refrigerator and the freezer and found a pair of dentures in the door of the freezer. And we thought, well, that's kind of odd. And so we called the previous pastor and said, we found some dentures in the freezer. We assume they're yours, so you can come get them anytime. And he said, don't worry about it. It's my spare set. I'll just come get them some other time. I didn't know you had spares. You didn't leave them in the freezer, right? Yeah, just leave them in the freezer. I'll come get them later. And so that was, for me, that was kind of, I thought, well, that's pretty par for the course. For Meredith, that was a very new experience for her to move into a place like that. But we laugh about that today. And then 4 years later, moving out of the same parsonage, we were reappointed to Lexington. Moving out of that same parsonage, we had Jenny and Kate, our twin daughters, had been born 2 weeks before that. And my wife's sister was getting married. I was co-officiating the wedding, and Meredith was the maid of honor. And so within 2 weeks, we had twin daughters. Meredith's sister got married, and we moved into a new home. And there's about 2 or 3 weeks of darkness that I don't remember very much of around that time. But that was a stressful time for us. But we laugh about it now to think, we don't know how we did it, but somehow we all ended up moved into a new place, and it was a good experience for us.
Well, so you might have the winner story for the most interesting welcoming gift that church has given to you upon arrival.
We have received lots of pies and meals, and that's been great. But never, if you need dentures, that's available too.
You never know, right? Anything when you think about transitioning to a new appointment beyond kind of the move part and the living situation, anything that comes to mind about how to make that transition well?
I think you have to be open and humble, and one thing I've learned as an adult is managing my expectations and my emotions, and also like noticing them and being able to acknowledge the sadness and the great expectation that comes on both sides of it. I think managing that is so important, and giving yourself space to grieve and to celebrate, and somehow at the same time do that. And as a father and a husband, I've had to learn to allow my family to do the same thing. And so finding ways to just to do that, and whether it's with our kids, helping them decorate their rooms, whether it's with whatever it is, but finding ways to acknowledge that we're a part of this process too. We're not kind of just these people who get moved around from place to place, but that we're real humans in this process too. And in the midst of that, it's so easy to just get caught up in the doing of things and to not notice how you're feeling.
Yeah,
too.
What a blessing for your girls that you've had similar kinds of experience that you can draw on to help them. And you really can say, I've been there and done that in a way that most people can't. So that's really cool. Duncan, thank you so much. We're really grateful for your time with us today, and appreciate the stories and also the wisdom that you've shared.
Well, thank you, Kim.
Today, I have with me Reverend Drew McIntyre, the pastor of Grace United Methodist Church in Greensboro, who will be sharing his story with us. Hi, Drew.
Hey, Jesse. Good to be with you.
So tell us a little bit about this very interesting new appointment story you've got for us today.
So, yeah, this is not just a new appointment story. It's a first appointment story. So this is, I'm serving a church. I'm, a couple months out of seminary. We begin new appointments typically in July. So we're about halfway through the month of July. I am as green could be. And I'm preparing for my first funeral ever. This is about 2 weeks after I started. It was kind of everything that could be pressure was there. It was my first funeral. I was on my own. I was, of course, nervous. It was a family that, for various reasons, had not been very active in the church. So it was kind of a big deal that they wanted to have the funeral at the church, because at the time they were not attending that church for a while, but it was still their membership. One of those situations. A great family, just had some issues of conflict with the church. So just a lot was riding on this funeral. And of course, I pulled out my seminary notes and tried to remember things about funerals. I tried to memorize as much of the service and the book of worship as I could. I, crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's, grammar check the bulletin, all those things. And I was at the church with my office manager, and it was an hour before the family was set to arrive for the viewing. So family was going to have a private viewing a couple hours before about an hour before the service, have a visitation before the service, and then the funeral. So we're waiting on the family to arrive. And it's about an hour before the family's supposed to get there. And everything's set. I've got my suit on. I'm great. Everything seems perfect. And my office manager looks out the window and says, there's smoke. There was not supposed to be smoke outside at that time. There's no reason for that. We weren't barbecuing. There was supposed to be no smoke anywhere. And at this church, the fellowship hall was a separate building kind of in the backyard. And so, of course, it ran outside with the 1975 fire extinguisher in my hand, in my suit, in July, sweating like crazy. And what had happened was there's a power pole, power line next to the fellowship hall, and the transformer on that pole had blown, and I guess the sparks from it had caught some brush on fire, sort of right next to the fellowship hall and a little like storage shed beside it. And so there was a fire at the base of this telephone pole, getting progressively closer to the fellowship hall in the July heat. It was dry. Those things. So, I run across the parking lot in my suit with the fire extinguisher, extinguish the fire. And of course we've called 911 at this point. So we're waiting on, people to get there from the fire department. The other piece of this is that the first clue we had that something had gone wrong was that the power suddenly went out. So before we even knew there was a fire, the power goes. So we're already freaking out about that. And then there's smoke, and I'm going to set the fire out. So the fire department comes, they put more water on it, it's fine. But literally, the family pulls up to get ready for their viewing for their loved one, God bless them, and there's fire trucks at church, which is not something anyone wants to see in the midst of that sort of emotionally fraught situation. But thankfully, everything was fine. We were a little worried, being July, that if the power didn't come back on, it was going to be about 150 degrees in the sanctuary. But thankfully, the fire department came. Duke Energy got up there quickly, got the power back on, and the service went well. And actually, it began a healing process for that family. And the husband of the deceased ended up coming back to the church, and he and I became very good friends. And over time, and he was very involved for most of my time at that congregation. It was just one of those things. And so, of course, after this, the joke became at the church that Drew began his appointment here with a baptism by fire, a trial by fire, which is still sort of funny and sort of not funny, because that was not a fun moment.
Well, that is an incredibly exciting story. We may be able to make a short film out of that one. If I write a book about ministry, that's chapter 1. It's a great way to start. So you have spoken to the family since. How much of an influence do you feel like that has been on your ministry, on the ministry of with that family specifically, if that's made a difference at all?
Well, it was such an odd situation that you sort of, thankfully they were empathic and understanding. And I think there was certainly a bond that comes from that sort of unusual, story and unique circumstance. And so, yeah, I think I ran into, because this is a different city, and this was 10 years ago plus now. I ran into one of the daughters of the woman who died just maybe a year ago here in Greensboro, and, gave her a big old hug, and it was good to see her. And so, but it was also became, of course, sort of a famous story within the congregation of this is what the new pastor had to do for his first funeral. So yeah, it was in retrospect, it's hilarious. At the time, it was terrifying, because I just thought, I was letting down. I was failing at my first real ministerial task, all those things.
Yeah, but so how did the congregation respond after that story? Do you feel like they embraced you a little bit more? Do you think that they how do you feel like they reacted to that?
Yeah, I think it's I think in general, for folks starting a new appointment, and if it's your first appointment, you don't know this, but if you've been appointed before, you know this, that those first funerals that you do really are what earns you a lot of trust with the congregation. Or it might not be a funeral, it might be another crisis, a pastoral care thing, someone who's sick or ill or whatever it is. But that's really, when you're new at a church, that's what earns you a lot of your kind of street cred and builds trust. And so going through, not just going through that funeral with the funny story, but walking with that family sort of from the time I started there through her illness and death, and then the funeral, and being kind of a healing presence, I think, healed a relationship, not just built a relationship with me, but healed a relationship between that family and the church. that has lasted. And that was probably the best thing that came out of all that. Not just my funny situation, but obviously the tragic situation of this mom and grandma that had died with cancer and suffered for a while. But there was some really beautiful healing that took place after it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Drew. Anything else that you've learned from that experience?
Just to, expect the unexpected, and crazy stuff's going to happen. You have to roll with it. You have to trust that God is with you. Trust that your people are going to understand if things happen that are truly out of your control. Like, everyone will understand. Like, no one could control that or predict that. That was no one's fault. It was just a thing that happened. And so you've got to, it was a good lesson in keeping your cool in the midst of a crazy situation. And I don't know, the old analogy of the duck on the pond, right above the water. The duck is calm and cool and collected, and below the pond, the legs are just flapping. And that was me that day for sure. Even before we knew about the fire. So definitely a lesson in sort of having to. I think the term that Jocko Willink uses is detach. Sometimes you have to detach from the situation and just move forward. And that was a good lesson in that for me that has stayed with me.
Well, thank you so much, Drew. I feel as a person who is about to receive my first appointment myself, I feel like there is a little bit more wiggle room for a little bit of craziness to happen. So I appreciate your story, and thank you so much for your wisdom.
You're welcome. Can I share one really quick story? One other one that applies to new appointment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
I don't even know about this one, and you don't have to use this if you don't want to. So when I was in seminary, I did my first field ed appointment, my first summer internship. It was this little country church in Stokes County, and it was a great church. Had a great summer there. But again, day one, the first time I walk into this church, I meet the pastor. He showed me around the facility. And again, small country church up on a hill. And he walks me to the basement of the fellowship hall, and we walk into the women's restroom, and there's a clogged toilet, and he grabs a plunger and starts plunging the toilet. And after a few minutes, he clears it, and he turns to me and he says, "Welcome to ministry." And again, that was a lesson to me that, like, oh, okay, wait, you're a jack of all trades here, especially in a solo charge. You're it. You might be the only staff person. Like, yeah, part of your job, they don't teach you in seminary how to do it, but part of your job might be plunging a toilet.
All right. Well, thank you, Drew McIntyre, pastor, plumber, firefighter, electrician, all of the above. Anything for Christ. Amen.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Drew. You have a great day.
You too, Jesse. Thank you.
We're going to have a conversation with Mark Barden, who is both a pastor, a longtime pastor in our annual conference, but he also is a preacher's kid, another PK. So has lots of experiences making transitions and moving both as a child and then throughout his entire life. Mark is the pastor at Central United Methodist Church in Shelby. And we welcome you, Mark. Thanks for being with us. We look forward to hearing some of your stories about making transitions.
Thank you, Kim. It's my pleasure. I'm an old pro at this. I've been doing it all my life. I counted the other day, and I think I've made 19 moves in my lifetime. But growing up in a Methodist parsonage, I thought was a thrill. Now, if you would ask my brother, he used to say that he never wanted to move again. But I always enjoyed it because I got to be in a new place and meet new people. So it was sort of an adventure for me. But moving is hard, even though it is an adventure. And I found that the more that the local church did to help incorporate us in as preachers' kids, the better off we were. And I remember particularly one move. It was an incredible move. We came on moving day. We were moving into the parsonage. And one of the first things we discovered is that our refrigerator was full of food. They knew that we wouldn't have a chance to go out to the grocery store, and they wanted to do a little more than just get the basic staples. So they had food in the refrigerator and freezer and had food in the shelves. I think it was enough to last us for a couple of weeks. And that really did make us feel welcome. In that same move, we also found that in the master bedroom, there was a queen size bed. Well, that doesn't sound too odd for now, but 40 years ago, that was quite a thing. And they didn't know whether we had any sheets for a queen size bed. And so they had bought a pair of sheets to have there at the bed as a welcoming gift, which is very, very nice. And we were very appreciative. However, I don't think they realized that we were moving from Kannapolis, home of Cannon Mills, and Mom and Dad had just gone to the employee store and bought up tons of towels and sheets to last us forever and ever and ever. So that was sort of a joke for us. The other thing about this particular move is we were going to be following a parsonage family that had 2 children our ages. And if you're a PK, you understand that there's a little bit of fear and trepidation, especially if you follow a parsonage family with children the age that you are, because in a way, you're sort of taking their place, but not taking their place. And the neat thing about this situation is when we went for the visit, there was a cookout with both the families, and we were able to get to know one another. And then their children took us around to meet some of the other children in the community, part of the church. And as we always did, we made it clear that they were welcome to come back at any time. I think because I remember at one particular church when I was in middle school, a place we dearly loved and hated to leave, the pastor that came in, who was, this was his last appointment. He didn't have any children living at home. And I can remember him on the visit pulling me aside and said, Mark, anytime you want to come back, you come on anytime. You're welcome. And that made me feel good because a lot of times we got the lecture from our parents. We're leaving and we have to leave this church behind and sort of leave our friends behind and open ourselves up to new friends and new experiences. So it was really a great sigh of relief on my part that I could go back and not have to worry about stepping on toes or anything like that. There are just lots of stories that I could tell about being a PK. And I think of myself when I got married and started having a family and thinking about my son, Chris, and what he would have to endure. And fortunately, he had smooth moves. And again, if the pastor had a child that was near his age, they were very gracious. He was in college the last time, and the pastor's daughter took him out to lunch with a couple of the others that were college students his age. And even though he wasn't going to live there, he felt incorporated into that community. And I was very appreciative of that. Another thing that really helped us feel welcome is in one particular situation, the parsonage, it was in great shape, but there were a few little things here and there that needed to happen, a little bit of painting here or there. And so the trustees and parsonage committee worked together to organize and have a checklist and invite people in the church to come over for a work day one Saturday about 2 months after we moved in. It was fantastic because all these little projects got done. One person came up with one of those huge smokers and smoked barbecue chicken, and we had a party on the lawn, and it was just a great experience to be able to work beside these new church members and get to know them a little bit better. And they had an opportunity to get to know us and to see the parsonage. That's one of the things that we've always tried to do. I think different pastors have different ideas about the parsonage. For some, it's a haven, a place to get away, and they really don't like any parishioners to come around. And then there are others, and we tend to be this way. The parsonage belongs to the church, and we're glad to have meetings there. We're glad to invite people over. And I have found that people in the church really appreciate that. And it's another way that we've been able to get to know people. But whichever way, there needs to be respect there and honor those ideas.
I would say, thinking about that kind of from our own experience of moving, based on what you said about having them over doing the work at the parsonage and having the meal, we always had the open house every Christmas. And if you can establish some of those practices from the beginning, it helps the work get done on the parsonage. That when you bring people into the parsonage, then they seem to recognize what the state of the parsonage is or what the work is that needs to be done. And it's easier to get the work done on the parsonage when people are in and out. So I think you're right, finding the happy medium between what your personal comfort is and what the comfort of the congregation is in order to help the parsonage stay, kept up, if nothing else, is really helpful.
You're exactly right. As a matter of fact, I was looking down in my tip section that the Christmas open house is a great idea. And especially if it's my open house, those of you who know me know I go a little overboard when it comes to decorating outside for Halloween and inside for Christmas. And I think this year I had 13 Christmas trees up. And of course, you do all that work, you want people to see it. So that is when we traditionally invite people in for an open house. And we found in order to keep the crowd down a little bit, we have 3 or 4 times that people can choose from. But we love it. We love it. We love people coming in and see it. And I can't tell you how many times people have remarked, I can't tell you how many years it's been that I've been into the parsonage. And it is a good way to build relationships and get to visit with them in a different kind of situation. There's some stories about leaving a place that some of them are funny, and it's a really strange time in that, again, it's a chance that some people want to see the parsonage. They haven't seen it, and you're scurrying around trying to get things done and trying to get out. And there is one time when my dear wife, who is just as calm and cool as a cucumber, when I really thought she was going to lose it. And that is when we moved everything into the den so that the parsonage committee could have access to the rest of the house. And Saturday before moving day, and moving day was on Tuesday, as it is now, the parsonage committee chairperson came up to Barbara on a Saturday and said, when can you move everything out of the den so that we can get in the middle and install a ceiling fan? And I could tell, oh, lady, you asked the wrong question. And with all coolness and togetherness that my wife always displays, she says, I think a good time to do that would be on Tuesday about 1 o'clock. And the one for me that stands out is we were in a parsonage that the church was very gracious in that, as sort of a going away gift, one of the things is they would hire a cleaning company to come in and clean the parsonage thoroughly. And this particular year, they decided to go with a different cleaner because they were cheaper. And it turns out that you get what you pay for. And after they had cleaned it, Barbara and I were going around, because growing up in a parsonage, we have certain standards that we have to meet. And it was just not up to our standards. There were things that needed to be done. And so the morning of the move, we were scurrying around trying to get everything done. Meanwhile, people from the parsonage committee and church were coming in to see some of the new things. And no one was helping us, which was kind of disconcerting to me. And about 11:30, we're supposed to be out at noon, but about 11:30, someone from the parsonage committee came downstairs where I was cleaning and said, Mark, there is a lamp that does not have a light bulb in it that works. There was a bulb there, but it was burned out. And we're supposed to leave light bulbs in every socket. And at that point, there were so many people they could have asked to go to the church and get a light bulb. But I said, okay, I'll go to the church and get a light bulb. So I went to the church and I went to the secretary and said, I need to get a light bulb. But it's about 12 noon and I'm supposed to be out of that parsonage. So to heck with the light bulb, I'll see you later. And I don't know if they ever got a light bulb or not, but I give an apology to the person that followed me that there was one lamp that didn't have a light bulb in it. Oh, there was one time my mom, I remember we were moving and the chair of the parsonage committee came in literally with a white glove and touched everything, even the light bulbs, to see if there was dust on the light bulbs. And I thought that was going a little too far. And we always get a joke about when we're moving is be sure and dust off the light bulbs. And I'll have to add to that, check them to make sure they work. One of the things that we like to do, and I think this is neat, it happened to us, and we have continued to do it. I think it happened about our second move, is the parsonage family that was leaving left a beautiful plant with a note on it saying, "I hope you enjoy your home as much as we have." And that just really meant a lot. It was an acknowledgement from the leaving family that we were coming in. It was a bridge of relationship building. And so ever since then, we've tried to do that and left either a flower arrangement or a potted plant, something like that, to say from our part, we welcome you and we wish you the best of everything and all God's blessings.
I love that.
And,
I've not heard that idea before. And I just love that
well,
idea.
It was a great idea, and I'm very appreciative that it happened to us early in our ministry so that we could continue to do that throughout.
Mark, thank you so much for sharing all of these stories with us. I think you've both given us something to think about, but something to kind of laugh about, and a reminder that it's good to have stories within families to share, to make it a kind of unified experience among the family, and memories to talk about for years to come, even when things don't go quite like you'd hope they would. It's good to have those stories to share down the road.
Thank you, Kim. It's my pleasure to share.
Thank you to our guests for sharing their experiences with us and providing some levity in such a busy and difficult time in our world. And as always, thank you for listening to the Means of Grace podcast.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you've enjoyed listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. That's WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Gojo Studios.